Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. The purchase and pricing question email line from you to me and my handpicked crew for your questions about buying this or any watch you see here on Watchbox Reviews. tmosso at thewatchbox.com. And today we are discussing one of the watches that got me into the JLC brand. This is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Chronograph. Launched in 2004, this is a substantial sports chronograph that contained Jaeger-LeCoultre's first ever automatic in-house chronograph caliber, 41.5 millimeters in stainless steel. You can see in profile, the watch is actually a little bit thinner than you probably expected, at 13.6 millimeters thick, so the watch does slide underneath most cuffs. And from lug to lug, 49.6 millimeters with a 21 millimeter spacing between the lugs. Now the watch came out in 2004, and it was part of the Master Compressor series of sports watches. They got JLC back into the sports watch game after, quite frankly, a few decades off. Let's throw the watch on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and you can see back in 2004, JLC got it right. The size, the proportioning, you can see it is not a thick watch on the wrist. It will slide underneath the cuff. From lug to lug, you can see it's not just the lug spacing, the distance across the wrist, which is sub 50 millimeters, but it's also the curvature of the end of the lug that helps it to wrap around the wrist and appear handsome. Even if you've got that smaller 14 centimeter circumference wrist, this one's going to wear just fine. The spacing between the lugs is 21 millimeters, so it has a nice proportional stance in relation to its case size, and you can see that the strap that's fit is a JLC factory piece. JLC really kicked off the double stitching trend of the 2000s with this series of straps. Double contrasting stitch, dark brown, large rectangular scale alligator leather. You can see a sheer side showing the layers of construction, bolstered down the center, calfskin on the underside, and you will note this is a JLC factory strap, brand new. You will be the first to gouge or crimp it, and you will do so with this, a simple stainless steel pin buckle for quick on-the-fly adjustments. Let's take a look at the case band. This case was used universally on everything from the Grand Memovox and Platinum all the way up to the minute repeaters back in the 2000s, and while the case was often scaled, the lines and the proportions were almost always the same. Rounded with an integrated lug profile, you can see it blends into the side with a little bit of a transitional bevel on the lug hoods, narrow lugs that are tucked on their underside. There is a conical bezel that is stepped up from the case flank. You can see everything is in high polish. And then on the 3 o'clock side, you have the compressor crowns. 1/2 turn, now you've unlocked the crown for winding and setting. 1/2 turn of the winglet, and now you've locked it once more. For the chronograph pushers, it's 1/4 turn. Red you're dead, white you're tight. It's that simple. It's color coded, and unlike a conventional screw down crown, it's easier to use when your hands are wet, sweaty, or gloved. On the dial, this is the watch that Magali Maitreya, who was the designer of all JLC men's watches during this period, described as her favorite design. She was in her early 20s when she started on these timepieces, so her perspective was distinctly different than, say, the wizened old men who undoubtedly update Rolex watches every generation or so. It was a very different look. It channeled in part the Polaris 68 dial, and remember, this was a full 4 years before the launch of the tribute to Polaris in 2008. You can see it as an instantaneous jumping chronograph. It has those Polaris-style indices as well as numerals. There is a scale outboard for a flange that represents a tachymeter, so you can gauge the speed of an object when used in conjunction with the chronograph. If you look very closely, you can see there are small loomed indices outboard on that flange, and each one has a lovely little detail, a red border, thoughtful, and again, no detail overlooked, a special series with a lovely rotating disc for the hours, instantaneous jumping minutes, and then as you can see, it is a fully loomed dial with what I would call a modified set of alpha hands pinched at the center and all of high polish. The dial is matte black to reduce glare, and underneath the case back, a solid gold medallion capping. By the way, that solid red gold medallion signifying that this movement went through the Master 1000 Hours control, a test of winding efficiency, power reserve, chronometric performance, resistances, and durability. It was one of the first in-house standards inaugurated in 1992 that actually surpassed the COSC in total rigor, and it is a fully cased up watch test. Again, 100 meters water resistant inside. Manufacturer automatic caliber 751, automatic winding, twin barrels for even torque release from max wind to minimum wind, and a 65-hour power reserve. It is a chronograph with a crisp column wheel as well as a vertical clutch, so all of the modern standards are represented. You can see the vertical clutch system makes for very smooth engagement and the column wheel for very crisp engagement. Of course, it beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour, unidirectional winding with a ceramic bearing. It's a very efficient winder on the wrist. It does not take much movement. Stop seconds as well as a quick set date function. And it features a free sprung architecture for shock resistance as well as a hairspring that was at the time made by Longa for JLC to JLC's own design, and it was laser welded at the stud and the collet to imbue the watch with still further shock resistance. So a very efficient winder with long legs, a modern mechanism, vertical clutch and column wheel, and very shock resistant as well. An impressive 41 jewel opus inside a case that has aged remarkably well, better than almost anything else from the early to mid 2000s. Email tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. The JLC Master Compressor Chronograph, you can really see the Polaris resemblance by night.